But the big question is, if we impose these sanctions, would it change Putin's behavior?
We have yet to see. What we do know is holding a hand out and just hoping that the Russians want peace, hoping that the Russians will take this great deal that the United States is brokering with them in Ukraine. That's not working. The Russians aren't taking it. Instead, they're accumulating more munitions, Stuart. They're preparing for a longer war, so you have to impose a cost. And the best next phase, in my view, is to impose it economically, choke out their ability to wage this war until the Russians understand that the United States, the biggest, most powerful economic and military power. And until we're willing to do that, I'm afraid, Stuart, that we're not going to have peace. We're going to have continued aggression on the part of Russia.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I am Brian Lusk. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. I do apologize. It's been a while since I've actually fired up a live stream, and there are, in fact, a variety of reasons for that. One of the chief among them is that I had a variety of computer problems and had to basically go through and reinstall all the, well, not necessarily the software, but completely wiped out all my streaming settings and had to start over again. So I just got everything back together, and looks like it's working pretty good so far. So let me know what you're seeing, if it looks like it's a little bit weird or odd, or if there's something going wrong. Also, I had a son get married and a daughter graduate from graduate from high school. Careful, I got to make sure I say the right thing there. And it has been just absolutely nutty for the last couple of weeks here. I do realize that it means that there is a lot that's happened around Ukraine and everything going on in the meantime, but I hope you'll forgive me, because a lot of the things I'm going to talk about are things that happened over the last several weeks, and I'm going to be summarizing a lot from memory. Now, this is all things that have happened. You know, a lot of that's going to happen over time. I've got current material as well. We're going to go through all of it, and I'll try and make it nice and straightforward for everything going on here. We'll start off with the intro was kind of interesting, and I thought the bit from Fox News, where it's basically saying, we've not tried doing this. We're not tried actually putting the screws to Putin yet. And that really kind of said everything about what's been going on. The U.S. has been very bad about giving Ukraine what they needed to win. Enough to not die, but never enough to win. So moving on from that, from Friedrich Merz, who is going to be the prime minister, as I understand, or something like that, from Germany, he states the Ukrainians are defending their lives, their country, and their freedom. Their great sacrifices are also defending Europe's security against Russia's militant revisionism. And as you look at what Russia's doing, they are literally reverting to how they were during the Cold War, how they were before the Cold War. This idea of Russian imperialism has been resurrected. They're literally bringing Stalin back from the grave in order to be able to move forward with this type of action. They're saying the Soviet Union still exists, that it never actually disappeared, that Russia is the heir apparent of the Soviet Union, and that they should be acting like that they are still the Soviet Union, bringing it back from the grave, as it were. Now, one of the things that did happen during the last couple of weeks here is that Russia tried a couple of times to launch some of their nuclear-capable ICBMs, kind of to show that we're still lethal here. Well, both of them destroyed themselves in various impressive ways. So the U.S., in response, on May 21st, launched one of their Minuteman III ICBMs, which are nuclear-capable missiles, just to show that they still work. It had traveled 4,200 miles to the U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Command's Ronald Reagan Ballistic Missile Defense Test Site, located within the Marshall Islands, and is reportedly impacted in that area. This shows that the U.S. is still quite capable of using its nuclear deterrent with no issues at all, even for these ancient, at this point, Minuteman III missiles. Whoops, let's get this translation out. I forgot I restarted my computer, and now everything's going to require a little bit of work here. And this is from Crimean Wind here. War is barbarity when one attacks a peaceful neighbor, but it is a sacred duty when one defends one's homeland. And that is where all of this comes down to. I would go to war to defend my family, to defend my homeland, to defend my nation. They may not want me there, but I would do it because that is how passionate I am about saving this nation. That does not mean that I should be marching into Canada and start shooting the place up to take it over. It doesn't mean I should start marching into Mexico and stealing more of their land. It does mean that when my country is threatened, as Ukraine's is, that it is a sacred duty to defend one's homeland. In that same vein, the U.S. has a sacred responsibility to keep its promises and help the Ukrainians defend their lands. And I am always saddened when we come up short of our moral high ground. Al Bundy states that his cousin was in the Air Force and said the Minuteman III maintenance is taken very seriously, and I believe it, because without those, we don't have a nuclear deterrent. The Russians, they don't care. I mean, yeah, they know that we're not going to launch. We're not going to be the ones to start that war. So they can let theirs deteriorate. But we know that if we let ours deteriorate, the Russians will absolutely take advantage. So there's been a lot going on between Vladimir Putin, Volodymyr Zelensky, and Donald Trump. And now I'm going to kind of summarize at the highest level here. Over the last several weeks, there was of course, the Ukrainians and the Americans had put forward a ceasefire. The Russians said no. They literally said no. Vladimir Putin did. No to the ceasefire, but we'll have this negotiation in Istanbul. In fact, Vladimir Putin stated, we will be in Istanbul for negotiations. And Ukraine said, great, we'll be there. Zelensky himself said, I'll be there. And then, of course, Putin had to walk back that to say, no. That we're not going to be there. No, that's just crazy talk. It's clearly the Ukrainians who are trying to cause this problem right here, even though the Russians were the one that proposed the location and the time. So the meeting in Istanbul did take place. The Russians sent their old negotiating team. And their old negotiating team was absolutely insulting. They said, if it's not 5 regions here that you're going to fork over, it'll be 6 tomorrow. It'll be 8. We're going to attack Sumy. We're going to take Kharkiv. That's the Russian negotiating team. And they're trying to spin it that Zelensky is the block to peace. So let's listen to this former ambassador to Ukraine, John Herbst. Let's go ahead and hit and pause that for a second. Bring it back. And
there's no doubt that Moscow's war on Ukraine has been a major blow against non-proliferation policy of nuclear weapons globally, right? The country that gave up nuclear weapons for assurances, including from Russia, that it would be secure to be attacked by one of those. And yes, defended by the others, but not fully defended by the others. Tells nations all around the world that if you wanted to protect your security and you can gain nuclear weapons, you should gain nuclear weapons. This is another failure of Biden's policy towards Moscow's aggression in Ukraine. The fact that he and his team were intimidated by Moscow's weapons, such that we would not arm Ukraine to take back its own territory, again, tells the world that even one of the two global nuclear superpowers is showing you indirectly that you need nuclear weapons. This is, again, part of the baleful legacy of Biden's policy towards Ukraine.
Do you think it can be fixed? I mean, can we just put everything back? The United States, first of all, and the biggest players.
Well, the attention span of most people is very short. If we were to reverse our policy tomorrow and arm Ukraine to kick the Russians out of Ukraine, that might prevent this narrative about the need for nuclear weapons from gaining further traction, right? Because then the big nuclear superpower would have gotten kicked out of the country that it invaded. But obviously, Biden doesn't have the backbone for that policy, and Trump does not seem to have the understanding for that policy. So I don't expect that to happen, although there is one scenario where this could happen. If Putin plays with Trump, and he's already playing with Trump, but if he plays with Trump to the point that Trump realizes Putin's taking him for a fool, he might get mad and arm Ukraine, as he said once publicly, as it's never been armed before. I'm not a general, right? I'm not a former military guy. I had very good reasons 2 years ago to believe that if we had given you ATACMS and F-16s and tanks in sufficient quantity early for use by the summer of 2023, you would have put Russia's control of Crimea in a very difficult position, and you would have taken back much of your territory. I don't know what combination of weapons you need now to do something similar. You would need more advanced weapons in greater quantity. But I suspect there is a package of such weapons that would enable you to do that. And conceivably, if Putin really gets on Trump, and Trump says, yes, Putin is playing me for a fool, and I'm not going to let that happen, he might go in that direction. But I think the odds of what I've just said happening are slim, 1 in 10.
Thank you, Jerry and Lucille. Apologize for that. It's clear that Putin is trying to play with Trump, that he's messing with Trump, trying to get the U.S. to back out of everything, stay away, and not support Ukraine. And that is how it's working. That is how Vladimir Putin is working at this point. But he doesn't want to tick Trump off to the point where he says, "I've got to arm Ukraine." In fact, Donald Trump said recently that if Russia keeps the territory and there is not a peace deal, then it will be clear. Then it will look like he lost, and Donald Trump can't stand that. So that's the thoughts on that. So we'll keep an eye on that aspect there. I thought that was a great video bit from the former ambassador there. Now, this is going back fairly far. We're back on May 19th here. Zelensky and Trump had a phone call, and then they then Trump and Russia had a phone call, and this is Zelensky's response here was, "This is a defining moment. The world can now see whether its leaders are truly capable of securing a ceasefire and achieving real lasting peace." And in that same vein, the truth is that we are losing the non-proliferation war right now. Countries around the world are saying, doggone it, if the U.S. won't support Ukraine, who they made a deal with, then the only way I'm going to be able to avoid being invaded by my neighbors is nuclear weapons. Even India and Pakistan, both sides have nuclear weapons. They still went to war. And so far, relatively cool heads have prevailed thus far. But we'll see how that turns out. Anyway, so Putin said actually, this is another good little clip here. Let me pause this here. Boom. And that's already on.
Ceasefire. Zelensky was basically abandoned in Turkey then by Vladimir Putin. So Vladimir Putin did not, in fact, show up. Zelensky yesterday did show up in Ankara. He was there to talk. And Putin didn't show because Putin has no desire for this war to end. He believes he can simply outlast the United States. The United States will get bored and withdraw support, and then he'll be able to do whatever he wants in Ukraine. Here was Zelensky talking about it yesterday.
You have a message for Vladimir Putin?
I'm here. I think this is very clear message.
Okay, so he said he was here. It was a message to Putin. President Trump, for his part, says nothing will happen until Putin and Trump get together. Ceasefire.
And that was from May 17th. So this is the ongoing situation we're seeing, is that Vladimir Putin continues to toy with Trump. There's just no other way to speak to that. During the negotiations, such as they were, the Russians were being very insulting. In fact, there was a lot of things that they said that were deliberately intended to provoke the Ukrainian delegation. So the Ukrainians fired back, but they did it in a very diplomatic way. They refused to speak Russian to the Russian delegation and used a translator to communicate, forcing that entire chain. Instead of submitting their voices to Russia, they said, no, we will use a translator. And they did. Putin continues to blame everybody but himself for everything going on. He did finally state that it was a war and not just a special military operation. This is just the pattern here. He's finally admitting it out loud. And the problem for Vladimir Putin is that he wanted to call it a special military operation so that he would have won without ever going to war. And his people would say, oh, Vladimir Putin is so powerful, his enemies fall before him. And now they're seeing things in a slightly different light, at least as time goes on. President Trump did finally say that Vladimir Putin was playing with fire. But every time he says anything about Vladimir Putin, he both sides it. He says, I'm disappointed in both sides. But Zelensky's done everything he could to accommodate Trump's requirements. So that is where we're seeing this go at this point in time. Then, of course, there's just so many things here. As I've heard said many times, they lie. We know they are lying. They know we know they're lying. But they continue to lie. And we continue to let them. So anyway, the Russians said, oh no, we only strike military infrastructure, places where there are soldiers and there are methods and equipment for making attacks, as they hit hospitals and preschools and residential areas. And they say, no, it is Ukraine that is hitting residential areas, that are hitting civilians in preschools and parks. But no, Ukraine's not hitting those things. It just continues to be how they do. They are stalling, though. They're trying to say that we'll have a talks announced very soon. In fact, one of the things they've talked about is putting forward their ultimatum plans, basically. And they promised they would do that, and the Ukrainians said, okay, we got to have it before our next meeting, which is supposedly scheduled for June 2nd, I believe, going from memory. And the Russians have been stalling. Nope, we're not sending it. We haven't sent it. We're going to send it. We are absolutely going to send it. Our demands, and we are going to send it before this, but so far they have refused to do so. So they're stalling for time. Zelensky says, look, we're ready for any format here. We'll talk Trump, Putin, and Zelensky. We'll talk Trump to Putin. And then we'll talk Putin, Zelensky. Any meeting. We'll do it anyway. Trilateral, bilateral. They're ready for any format. Yeah, I was just mentioning this one a little bit ago. So then, of course, Vladimir Putin put out this demand that a written pledge from Western leaders to halt NATO's eastward expansion. But Putin himself has said eastward expansion has nothing to do with it, that NATO's expansion has no effect on this. But now he's saying, no, it's got to be, there's no eastward expansion now, and Ukraine must be neutral. And you got to give us back our frozen assets. And you have to give us protections for our Russian speakers. He's making up stuff on the fly, is what it really comes down to. Medvedev said, oh, yes, you're toying with creating World War III here. You don't want to do that. We're going to have World War III if you guys keep arming Ukraine. And U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg, who's been basically sidelined at this point, called Medvedev's threats reckless and unworthy of a global power. I mentioned this earlier in passing, that the negotiating team for the Russians tried to provoke the Ukrainians as much as possible, including stating that Sumy should be Russian. And we'll talk about some more of that as we get into things. By the way, now that I've kind of gone through the early part here, Al, Lucille, Jerry, Robbie, glad to see all of you here. Thank you for joining me this evening. Always glad to see you, and I'm glad you guys still tune in when I managed to get a live stream together. Let's go to news out of Ukraine now. That's the wrong stuff there. Let's try this one instead. There we go. An F-16 was lost during countering Russian missiles and drone attacks. The pilot was recovered, so that's at least the good news. The pilot's much harder to replace than the plane. Over in Kherson, one of the things that has been going on is the Russians have been using their drone teams to try and depopulate Kherson itself by hunting down individuals, citizens, civilians, and attacking them with drones. It's basically training areas for their drone operators where they will just watch the town of Kherson and watch for anything that moves and just attack it, regardless of whether it's an old man on a cane, a young kid in a park. They're trying to depopulate the town by attacking every civilian there. And this is not being mentioned at all in the mainstream media. It is being mentioned by the people suffering under it. And I'm seeing it from the Russians too. Ukraine's developed a new AI-driven automated air defense turret, though. That was interesting to destroy the Shahed 136s. It autonomously detects and neutralizes smaller targets and high-speed cruise missiles with its gun. So it's really interesting to see that Ukraine is really embracing every technological advantage they can. Now, while Russia was saying, oh, yes, we are being victimized by Ukraine, they were simultaneously launching 900 attack drones and many, many ballistic missiles and cruise missiles into Ukraine night after night after night, into Kyiv, into Odessa, into basically civilian cities. Constant bombardment. And this has been going on for the better part of a week now, where and I was kind of mentioned earlier, at least at the start here, that the summer offensive is started. This is part of it. They are trying to demoralize Ukraine and force their capitulation. Interestingly enough, even though there's been such a tense relationship between Ukraine and the United States lately, Ukraine will start importing American liquid natural gas via a new route through the EU. Gas will flow in reverse from Greece through Bulgaria, Romania, and Moldova. This is literally at the doorstep of Hungary. And the Ukrainians are saying, we'll take the gas. We'll buy the gas. And Hungary is saying, no, we're not buying that gas. We want Russian gas. President Zelensky did state that Russia will start feeling the real impact of Western sanctions by summer of 2026, and notes their defense industry won't keep growing next year and expects it to shrink steadily. Now, there are some other aspects to this. He wants the U.S. to step up pressure, And there are many indications that this is going to be an issue. Right now, Russia's economy is effectively fully engaged in warfare in every aspect. Men are going to the front. Equipment is being built specifically for war. There are many aspects of their economy that are entirely reliant on them being in a constant state of warfare. They are still looking for more air defense missiles, especially as the Russians have bumped up the attacks. They're still using their Patriot missiles carefully, tackling the toughest threats. They use rockets and their partner weapons and their F-16s. They are using everything they can to defeat the drones and missiles coming in. Interestingly enough, Ukraine has deployed AI-powered drone motherships where they can carry FPV drones up to 300 kilometers, release them to autonomously strike targets, and the mother drone is able to return and land for reuse. Just fascinating to see the changes in technology as we go forward. But not everything is wonderful or peachy over on the Russian side either. The Kremlin is setting conditions to establish permanent control over the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, suggesting that Russia plans to illegally occupy and annex additional territory in Ukraine. Right now, that plant is on the border. And they're clearly setting up the situation where they could be able to hold it, keep it, and potentially use it. Whereas the Russian officials are leveraging the fact that Ukraine and Russia set no concrete deadlines for the next steps in the peace process in order to delay the process altogether and prolong the war. Now, there was something I caught literally right before I jumped onto the this stream. Let me see if I can find it real fast here. Boom. Yeah, here it is. From the Institute for the Study of War, Russian officials continue to dictate the terms and timing of peace negotiations with Ukraine and are attempting to obfuscate the current state of negotiations. Russian officials are setting conditions to falsely accuse Ukraine of delaying negotiations. Putin continues to use orchestrated public engagements to forward the Kremlin's efforts to create a militarized Russian society united against the West that supports a prolonged war in Ukraine and possible future conflict with NATO. They're setting themselves up to march across Europe. But the Ukrainians are not sitting idly by. There's an explosion at a military base in Provolne in Crimea, which was attacked by drones on the 16th. Let me see. Let me put that aside for now. I'll come back to that later. I know they've got more about drone attacks. There was a strike on the Zeleningrad Technology Park in Moscow, where I believe its missiles are, at least components for missiles, are produced. I believe there are 8 direct strikes on it. Russia, for their part, are modernizing their nuclear silos. And ironically, it appears that there is a German company that I believe it's NAP, but I'm not sure, that has been providing material and expertise for modernizing these silos. And I caught that from a couple of sources. And that means that it's going to continue to be a problem to get these sanctions in place in ways that will actually hurt. Peskov complained about drone attacks on Russia. Well, stop attacking Ukraine and there won't be any attacks on Russia. Let's see that more about the Russian microelectronics plant Micron was damaged in the attack. That is their largest electronics manufacturer. Whoops. Let's refresh this and see if I can pick that up. Russians stated they shot down 296 drones, but airports were closed for several hours with huge lines of canceled flights and people trying to reschedule. Overnight, now this is from actually just last night. Overnight, the Kronstadt drone facility in Dubna near Moscow was hit. In Zeleningrad, they also attacked that one again. And preliminary reports suggest that 300 Ukrainian drones entered Russian airspace overnight. Partisan efforts continue to take place. this partisan Atesh unit in Russia destroyed another relay cabinet, which does cause some issues for the trains passing through the area. As it says, has paralyzed the military train movement on this vital route. Funny enough, their blueprints, layouts, and internal systems of Russia's most sensitive nuclear weapons sites were leaked because they were put into procurement documents for buying materials for these sites. They need to figure out their IT security is what they need to do. More drone facilities being struck by the Ukrainians. I believe this is the same one here. Yep. Russian defense contractor Avangard is on fire in St. Petersburg. They make components for air defense systems for Russia. In Moscow itself, as of yesterday, they were putting air defense vehicles on the streets with guns. In fact, if you watch carefully, I think you'll see it. There's a man manning a machine gun to shoot down these drones. You got to remember, they've got to watch where those bullets go, too. See, there's a man manning the machine gun there. So the Russians are shooting their own town up to try and save it. And a number of Russian Air Force transport and airlift assets were fleeing Moscow as drones came into the area. This is as of 2 nights ago, although there was a repeat last night. Theoretically, this is probably just continuity of government operations, but it could also be an indication that they don't feel they can protect those assets in Moscow itself. The Ukrainians continue to target senior Russian military officials in Moscow with car bombs. In fact, another official was killed just last night. In fact, it was just reported this morning. So that continues apace. I find that a little distasteful, but I also understand where they're coming from. According to people who count these things, Russia has lost over 4,000 tanks based on visual confirmations compiled by Oryx. Of the 4,029 losses, 2,946 were destroyed, 158 damaged, 392 abandoned, and 533 captured by Ukrainian forces. So the Russians continue to lose tanks upon tanks upon tanks, and this is just those with visual confirmation. And finally, in the middle of Bakhmut, this is actually from Victory Day back on May 9th, the Russians did a little parade of drones and posters and billboards of the destroyed city of Bakhmut. No civilians, no buildings, no signs of life, just soldiers, flags, and billboards in a city they destroyed. Let's move on to the international front. Now, Viktor Orban, you may remember him from Hungary. He, as a reminder here, in fact, let me see, do I have details on this? Okay, I'm going to high level this for a moment here because a lot of what happened, I think, prior to my previous live stream. The Hungarians had actually set up a spy ring inside Ukraine to try and take the temperature of the country, determine how likely people were to accept Hungary marching in and taking that part of the country over. It seems like they aren't paying attention to what happened to Russia when they did the same exact thing. But the Ukrainians released video and showed that they had uncovered and dismantled this military intelligence network operating in the Transcarpathia region in western Ukraine. This really strained the relationship between Hungary and Ukraine even further. On top of that, when that happened, Hungary took a random official from the Ukrainian embassy, accused him of being a spy, and expelled him. It was kind of one of those hurried type of things going on. On top of that, 66 BTRs have been transferred from Hungary to Serbia, in theory to prevent them from being donated to Ukraine. It seems like this is this is the format that Hungary is trying to accomplish here to prevent them from being forced to give equipment to Ukraine if somebody else takes control of the country. And overall, the situation in Hungary remains extremely tense. So that is kind of interesting to keep an eye on, and we will continue to watch that situation as things go forward. Now, of other international items here, Senator Chris Van Hollen was clashing with Secretary of State Marco Rubio back on the 20th, accusing him of throwing Ukrainian people under the bus while Putin plays him like a fiddle. And he ended up stating, "I regret voting for you." This is the disunity that the Russians have managed to create in the United States. Germany set up a new military aid package worth 5 billion euros. A lot of this is actually in the form of providing money and resources so the Ukrainians can run like the Dickens and build more of their own weapons. A lot of this is going to be long-range German-designed weapons or Ukrainian-designed weapons that the Ukrainian state, look, all we need is money and resources, and we've got the ability to crank out tons of this stuff. This appears to be part of that package. Apparently, Blue Sky did not like it when I refreshed everything. Of course, the Russians stated that Germany is sliding down the same slippery slope it has already followed a couple of times in the last century, down toward collapse. They're very unhappy with Russia's decision to help Ukraine produce their own long-range weapons. Now, kind of part of the context here is that I believe it was German Chancellor Merz announced that there would no longer be any limitations on the range or engagement rules that were applied to Western provided aid to Ukraine, which really makes Russia nervous. According to the German Ministry of Defense, the first batch of long-range weapons that are produced in Ukraine and funded by Germany could be ready within weeks. The systems are domestically made, already in service with the Ukrainian armed forces, and require no additional training. Pretty cool. Samsung, for its part, ceased sourcing critical metals for display production from Russia in 2024. I'd say that's 2 years too late. Belarus is planning to put their Oreshnik, the Russian Oreshnik, onto locations in Belarus, and says that Ukraine should not perceive this as a bluff. The Netherlands has sent the final batch of F-16 fighter jets destined for Ukraine. It was a total of 24 of these jets. Turkey and Belgium are joining the international coalition that is co-led by Latvia and the Brits to help support Ukraine's drone capabilities. Pretty cool there. Germany has also signed a 2.2 billion euro contract with Diehl Defense to supply Iris-T air defense systems and missiles. Iris-Ts are really good, actually, and is part of that wider 5 billion euro German military aid package. Quickly go through and get some of these refreshed real fast here. Back up. Okay. So the EU Council put together a document on strengthening democratic resilience, countering disinformation, and supporting independent media. Hungary and Slovakia both refused to sign on to it. So Poland, who is currently the EU president, released it as presidency conclusions backed by 25 member states. So it still gets out there. But you can tell which side Hungary and Slovakia are on at this point in time. Skip ahead. Skip ahead. The European Union is also launching a new Black Sea strategy to boost defense readiness amid the growing Russian threats, including $75 billion in infrastructure upgrades for military mobility, a new maritime security hub, and deeper ties with Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and others. Europe's finally starting to wake up. They're finally starting to get serious about their own defense. Better late than never, but it may be too late. We're just going to have to watch. 59% of EU citizens support the purchase and delivery of military equipment to Ukraine, with 27% saying that it's their top concern, followed by the international situation at 24%, security and defense at 20%, with 77% agreeing the invasion poses a security threat to European Union security, according to a new survey. Here's the bit about a German company assisting with the construction materials for modernization of Russian nuclear facilities. I would think that the Germans could do something about that, but we will see. And this popped up today. China has halted sales, although just so we're clear, others say that hasn't been halted, just reduced sales of Mavic drones to Ukraine and other European countries, but continues to supply them to Russia, where production lines even include Chinese personnel. Now, that came from President Zelensky, but I've seen multiple sources on this one. And so I've got about 2 different versions. So I can't absolutely state one way or another as far as which one's absolutely true. Still, that indicates that China is definitely, they're being a better partner to Russia than we are to Ukraine, okay? That's simple. Lots of things going on the front lines. This area in Sumy is right outside Sudzha. The Russians seem to have managed to start coming into this area here, turning the tide a little bit against Ukraine, though Ukraine continues to hold small slivers of territory over here in the Sudzha region here. So that continues to be a hot area of the front. The Russians reportedly have amassed 65,000 troops to try and push into Sumy. And they have attempted multiple times over the last several days to push deep into this area, this region. So far, no luck for them. Well, minimal luck, I'll just say it that way. Plenty of other things going on. They've also reports that the situation near Kharkiv is continuing to be difficult. We'll have to see how this turns out. They've not really seen much changes in the lines. Let's pop it back a few. A little bit of here and there, but nothing really major at this point. Watch that area, though. It could get very nasty. The rest of the front lines was quickly... No major changes in this area here. The main areas that have been kind of moving have been this area down here near Pokrovsk and Toretsk. I'm going to back this thing up a few days to the 20th. Now, this is why I'm stating that Russia's summer offensive has started. Now, if you watch here, I kind of got an overall view of this area. We're going to move forward. You can see little sprouts popping up of the Russians advancing over the last 8 days. This is very challenging situations here. The Ukrainians, from all reports, are digging defensive trenches behind the current set of lines. This could be bad, it is bad, but this could be very bad, or this could just reflect the fact that Russia has moved off of the defensive and onto the offensive to try and take some serious territory right now. The overall situation is never pretty, but we're keeping an eye on it. No major changes so far. Zelenopol is reportedly occupied, and other areas the Russians have advanced. We're just going to have to watch and see where things go. From Jake Bro, Russia is planning a big 2025 summer offensive, but nobody really remembers Russia's big 2024 summer offensive, where they stalled out 5 kilometers deep into Ukraine at the city of Volchansk. This is why these changes I'm seeing now are why I believe Russia's summer offensive have started. Will they make big progress? Probably the Russian side will be declaring that they're making huge progress. I suspect they'll make modest gains at best. Still, modest gains are not gains that are good for Ukraine. Zelensky reported that there are over 50,000 troops massing near Sumy region for the Russians, but there are also reports the Ukrainians are preparing for them as well. That's the reason why, from all reports I've seen so far, the Russians have not managed to make any real progress in the Sumy area, even though it appears that they have started attempting that offensive. From the Russian side, Wargonzo states that in Zaporizhia, the Russians are continuing to put pressure on areas, but you don't see any real major changes. Donetsk, they state that they have developed the offensive. And Chasiv Yar, they state the fighting continues within the city and on the flanks, but with very little information. And in Sumy, the Russians claim that the Ukrainians are attempting to improve their positions in the border area and attacking the Totkino area, but that the Russians have repelled them all, whereas the Russian troops continue to develop the offensive in the Sumy region, forming a buffer zone. So we're watching this. There is some indication that the Ukrainians are continuing to hold continuing to hold Russian territory, and the Russians are trying to push into Sumy. We're just going to have to watch this one over the next while. This is basically a Ukraine control map confirming the information I just mentioned. Zelenopol and some various contested villages. Al, I have not had good information on exact composition. The impression I keep getting is that they do not have a lot of tanks on these offensives. The best information I'm getting is that they're using light, fast civilian vehicles and what armor they can scrape together. Some of it is battle barns, but they're basically just converting tanks into armored troop transports at this point in those areas. There's it appears that the primary parts of the offensive are going to be aviation, bombs, missiles, and then infantry either on foot or on motorcycles and other light civilian vehicles. I'm still waiting for more information about what's going on, but there's not been any significant reports of real armor hitting the front lines. Over here, the Ukrainians reported that the Russians attempted to assault into the Sumy region to breach Miropilia in the Sumy region, less than 1 kilometer from the Kursk border, and they did not successfully make that progress. There's additional reports of troops on the Sumy region. And finally, we've got from Knoll reports, southwest of Velika Novosilka, the Russians have advanced into Zelenopol, planting their flag in the center. Heavy fighting still continuing in that area. And that's basically the situation on the front lines. There's a lot going on, but not a lot of changes in lines. The Russians are clearly on the offensive again. They're trying their best to make progress. A lot of this war has gone to drone war and lightning fast infantry offensives. It's like World War I with drones. All right, let's take a look at a few interesting extras. Again, thank you very much for joining me here, as always. This I found interesting. If you watch here, this soldier is walking through this field, and he is dragging hundreds of yards of fiber optic line in his wake as he walks, because there is so much fiber optic cable being used that it's literally covering the ground. I'm going to go ahead and back this up, and I'll try to, I believe this is in Ukrainian, so I'll try and read it to you. You have a granddaughter. A grandchild? You have a granddaughter. I wrote you. A granddaughter? Yes, Garinotska. 3 months old. So, Grandpa, congratulations. Thank you, Grandma. You have one more person waiting for you. A beautiful little granddaughter. Thank you. So we are grandparents now. Thank you. This is great news. This is a soldier that was just exchanged and is just returning home to Ukraine. He came home and was immediately told that he was now a grandpa. This war can't end soon enough. And finally, we're going to end with this video footage of the Ukrainian attack on a train carrying fuel. And you can see that train is on fire in the video content here. Simply impressive. That's the work of Ukrainian drones to stop this from getting to the front lines. And that's everything for today. Thanks again for joining me. I really am glad you're here. I know that there's lots of things that you could be doing on a lovely Thursday evening. I'm just thankful you guys spent a little bit of that time with me so we could talk about what's going on in Ukraine and at least stay informed of what's going on. It is challenging. I'm trying my best to get onto a schedule here. The life has been busy between son getting married, a daughter graduating, and just crazy things going on. So thank you. You guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next live stream. Bye.